Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Erica Heald, and welcome to Content Chat. This is our post-Thanksgiving edition. So, forgive me if I'm a little slow, but there's lots of turkey, and turkey makes you sleepy. And
Facts.
today, I'm joined with Maureen Jan, my friend and co-conspirator in all of these things, who is going to be my special guest from now until book launch in January. Thank you, Maureen, for agreeing to sit here today with me and with Kupo. Kupo, who apparently really is excited about talking with us about data and using data and proprietary research and all those things in order to create so much more um, relevant content. Thinking about relatives, Thanksgiving, the brain, it works funny. But we're talking all about how you can create that content that's going to resonate with your community and really reflect what you know about your people. Because when you're thinking about what can you do that the robots can't do, well, it's about really truly knowing them and taking all of those hidden troves of internal data and insights and really using them to reach people with things, with content that's uniquely valuable and that only you can create. So, Maureen, why don't you jump in and share a little bit about who you are, what you do when it comes to this kind of content?
Sure. Well, if you haven't seen me on here before, Erica and I have done this many, 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 many times. I have been a marketing director and building departments from the ground up, including owning the content function. I have owned an agency. I have been in tech. I have been all the things. And now I'm a director of marketing from North America for Anunta, a technology company that focuses on VDI, DAS, and endpoint management. So lots of tech, 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 tech. So, but what I love about the tech part is that when done well, we have a bucket of useful, interesting, and proprietary data. And I think we have a lot more data than I think we collectively think we do, from everything from analytics um, to the actual usage data of our organizations, to the usage data of our website, to the use of, we have an abundance of data across the board, almost in no matter what industry you're in. And it turns out, and this has always been true, I think, of content, is that it's more important than ever for us to be using data that answers questions we can only answer from our perspective, our unique perspective, right? And and so I and now with AI and trying to figure out how to compete in a market that's the pressure is just on, this is more important than it's ever been. It's always been important to create unique content, but now it's more important than ever to tell stories that other people can't tell. And so
Totally,
that's why I'm
totally.
excited about this topic.
Same. And it's funny because, I'm just thinking back to when I was leading the content team at Achievers, which is the employee engagement platform. I remember, of course, I was shiny and new in my job, and I was so excited to get my hands on data from the platform and how it had really shaped employee engagement. And it was funny because it was like, well, only the data scientists can access all of that. And you, content marketing, are so low on the priority list. So there was no hope that we could get the information I wanted. And in some cases, the situation was just that simply we weren't asking questions at time of onboarding that would allow us to benchmark. And
Mm,
so, when I think about how far we collectively as marketing teams and content teams have evolved over the past decade, you would not have that same situation because one, you don't need the data scientist necessarily. It's great if you have one, but you don't have to. And two, I think there's a lot more recognition for the value that you can really create by harnessing that internal data to create something truly differentiated.
and I think it also speaks to the fact that content and marketers who deal in content if you give them space to ask questions like, are you benchmarking the data? like the stories that you can tell on behalf of the business are so much more impactful from a strategic perspective, from a leadership perspective, from a channel perspective, from a partnership perspective, and also from a content perspective. What a huge impact if you have a before and after number. And so it just goes to show that like marketing should never be brought in at the end of the project. It should be a part of the strategic conversation, because asking questions like that changes the fundamental game of how we're collecting information and how it impacts the business in a way that's meaningful.
Could not agree more. So with that, why don't we jump in, and why don't you share from your perspective, like what's some of those really core pieces of owned internal data that your marketing team needs to have access to in order to be able to start, surfacing those insights that'll create those great stories?
Yeah, I'm going to talk about like ideal circumstances, because I think even today we're struggling with getting some of this data. Like, let's be honest, it's hard. Engineers still don't want to talk to marketers. This is not new, this is still happening in today's world. So, but in my perfect world, what I'd love to see us do is have product usage trends, if that's something that's an option for you. Anything where you have a support ticket or support ticket categories or themes. This is my favorite: AI transcribed sales calls.
Heck yeah.
Literally the holy grail for me of hearing the customer say in their own words what they want, what they're confused about, what they need more information on. It's pure magic. That's my favorite one right now. But then there's also the customer interviews, right? And this should be happening outside of case studies, right? So this should just be an ongoing conversation. In some ways, you can do the AI transcribed sales calls to actually help supplement that, but making sure that you're continually interviewing the customers or being on sales calls where you get a few minutes and you can ask them questions is a huge piece of it.
And not to beat a broken drum about governance, but if you have a really well-defined voice of the customer program in place, and you have like a great, even spreadsheet set up for these customers, you'll have a place where people are thinking about capturing things that these customers have said, so that then you, the marketer, can go follow up and see, hey, is this somebody who might be open to a conversation where we can really unearth something special?
Absolutely. I think that's a great point. And also today, not to beat a dead, whatever, the product usage trends, I think, are another piece that if you have good governance and good understanding of what's happening and you're asking the right questions, which we talk about a little bit more, I think we'll talk about that later, but I think it opens up doors to unique content that no competitor can replicate, right? Like this is your base. You anonymize this data about your users. You can build assumptions on your users. And if the sample size is big enough, holy moly, what a magical moment you can create. What kind of amazing conclusions you can draw.
And of course, then if you don't have access to all of those things, that's when you can also lean into doing proprietary research, where you're reaching out to your customers and to your ideal future customers and asking them questions. When I got told no, I could not have any time on the data scientist dance card, what did I do? I did a newsletter subscriber, interview series that was based on, going out and putting a survey out in the field, because we had, a pretty robust database. And I got, several thousand replies back where people actually filled out my survey and then shared a lot of qualitative information with me. So I got back all that reader survey data, and then I turned it into a slide share about what the current state of, the HR professionals, things on their mind was. And it was amazing because I didn't share all of my data. I kept some of those goodies to myself, but I was able to give back to all the people who participated and to our larger subscriber base, and say, here's what's on everyone's mind. Here's what people are worried about. Here's how they're addressing things. And it was, to quote you, magical. It was magical because when you can serve back up to your customers what they're saying, they feel, really validated and heard, and they want to co-create content with you.
Absolutely. And I think It's an incredible trust building opportunity too. Trust is big on my mind right now because working with the IT leaders is as with marketers, we're highly skeptical. It's a lot of questions. They're not interested in actually having a conversation with you. But when you have this opportunity to ask and then receive, and then give back again, it becomes this virtuous cycle. So that's one of my favorite ways to engage with people, is ask for their expertise and then help them build on that expertise with more. So
Well, and I mean, that goes for your internal partners too, right? Because when you think
absolutely.
of, frequently the internal folks who aren't on the marketing team, they have so much more access to customers and to customer data than we will.
It's so true. Those the observation-based intel that they are getting when they're on the phone with customers during support calls, or challenges, when customers come to you with challenges or problems, and you can understand and distill what that challenge is and how this a solution. I mean, the story tells itself, even if it can't be a case study, it can still be this opportunity for a storytelling moment where only you have access to this particular situation and you have the data behind it and you know how to fix it and you know how to apply. There's it's just really unique. And like I said, in this day and age where we're really struggling for creating gray goo, I think is what you called it at one point, the gray goo of copy. I don't know. One of us
The
said it.
grayish, I think I called it grayish, like beige.
Yeah. Yeah. And this is just a great way to stand out. It really helps us. Um, without the huge budget too, because this is what I love about first party research is you can spend $5,000, you can spend $120,000. Like the range is huge depending on what your budget looks like.
And frankly, the readership survey I did, my budget was my time. We had no money, so we had a big enough database, and we had enough engagement from those folks who were regularly interacting with us, that we got back 3,000, I think, survey responses, which is pretty great.
I was literally thinking when you said that, how I would celebrate if I had 1,000 responses to anything I've done ever in this particular industry. They're so skeptical. I don't get a lot of responses. So for me, the paid side works better. But like I said, there's a variety of different, budgets. So if you have a really responsive audience like yours, that's willing to give for freely, amazing. If not, then you have this other opportunity to pay, and you can do it at a variety of different budgets. So that's really cool.
Totally.
Yeah.
What have you found has actually worked for, like, helping those internal teams kind of like know what to look out for, and then have a way to actually communicate with the marketing team to share all those kinds of little tidbits and insights?
Honestly, I run into a lot of challenges in getting that communication line open, which I imagine is probably the understatement of the world for every marketer ever. Um, I also, because our jobs are very big, like I'm a marketing generalist, I do a lot of things. I do everything from writing to design to building landing pages, like the whole 9 yards in my gig. So the idea of also like trying to fish information out of people is almost time prohibitive. However, I need it, right? And that's why, like in our instance, like we have Gong, and Gong records all the calls. And so I
Yeah.
can go in and access it when I have time, and I don't have to cajole anybody to give me what they need, because I
Yeah.
can just go get it in a database full of calls. And I have to, like I said, we talked about this a few minutes ago, but game changer for me as a marketer. So
Yeah, no, I definitely love any of those kinds of sales call recording and AI enabled tools. They're so helpful. And
yeah.
then I'd also say, I've also, of course, experimented with having those really easy give an idea to the content team kinds of intake forms. But, that's only if you have somebody who really loves participating in
Yep.
content creation. But I've also tried to make a point of having those folks that I check in with on a quarterly basis that are my marketing friendly folks on some of those teams. So I would do the quarterly check-in just to hear from them,
Yep.
and just try to develop that friendship in a way that they felt like they could come to me with ideas, even if it's just sending a quick Slack message or something.
Yeah, and to that point, now that you say that, it sort of jogged my memory. One of the things we just recently started was creating a monthly content idea collection. Like, what are you seeing that people, and this is with our people with our sales team with deeper engineering experience. So having them have a conversation with me once a month and be like, what are you hearing? What's going on? What triggered, what did you have a pissed off customer? Was there what is creating friction in the environments that you're talking to them about, that kind of thing? And I think that and we've yet to have one, so like I can't promise it's going to be good. Hard to
I think it's
say.
a great idea, though. It's a nice way to do something that's kind of, editorial board adjacent, but
Yeah.
doesn't feel like a heavy lift to anybody.
Yes.
It feels more casual in a positive way.
Yeah. I do worry though that it will be hard for people to be prepared to come in with ideas because everybody's so busy. So I'm really curious. I'll have to report back and see how it goes.
Definitely. I can't wait to hear it.
Yeah.
So
So
there is one more that we haven't touched on yet, one more kind of data resource that I would say technology companies in particular rely really heavily on, which is, purchasing those third-party analyst reports and access to research. And there's always this pressure around making the most out of them. And that to me is really tough because even if you're included in that, it's not yours. And you're not going to be the only one providing access to it. So, that one to me is a little bit, it's a little tough because there seems like there's always so much pressure to engage with that kind of content. But I don't know that the ROI is always there.
I agree with you. There's a lot of public facing analyst content and industry reports that we could just pull information from. And what I like to do is actually use it to help sort of bolster the work that I'm doing, right? So like I've already got a perspective. Here's what I've found to support that perspective from like respected analysts. And I think it's also really, really important to remember that most analysts are pay to play regardless. So the bias is still very strong within these organizations and how they come to market. And I know that we want to be on the lists and we want to be in the quadrants and all the things. And I'm not saying don't do that, but I'm just saying remember that this is a lot of pay to play stuff. So use it with a grain of salt. Don't rely on it as the key source of your data. If use it to help support the information that is uniquely yours. Don't let it stand on its own. I just don't think it's enough anymore.
Totally.
Yeah.
So especially now that you're in this new role, although you were certainly, you were an external consultant before you came in-house. But I'd love to hear, like, how do you approach coming into an organization where you don't know what you don't know, where you don't know what's being tracked? Like, how do you actually approach things without coming in like a steamroller and being like, give me all of the data and being overwhelmed? Like, how do you approach this?
Yeah, I think like most marketers, like we're just trying to do our job as best we can with with as few needs as possible, right? Like be as self-contained as we possibly can. However, I learned slowly over time that we had proprietary data and we had proprietary usage information for the supporting things. At first it was like, oh, we're just a services organization. Oh, wait, we have proprietary software that supports our services. Oh, so we have data. That's exciting. Oh, and one thing we didn't talk about that I thought was interesting that popped up in some of my conversations was NPS reports. So like,
Net Promoter Score.
Yeah, the net promoter scores and what people are saying about us or about anybody who's doing the NPS. It's such it's such an opportunity there as well, like to gather those comments and gather those scores and use them as proof points in addition to insight points. Like, what are you learning from your customers? If they're not happy, actually, most importantly, if they're not happy, what are you learning from them? How are you making it better? How can you create a cycle of transparency from the negative information you're getting and saying, oh, great, well, thank you for this information. And now we're going to transparently show you how we improved over time using your content, right? What a cool opportunity to say, we heard you. here's how we're fixing it. Here's how we're going forward. I mean, that's a case. You are your own case study then.
Yeah, and frankly, that is the same for internal as well. When
Hmm.
you're collecting that kind of feedback and data from your partners, that's something you also can be looking at, because when you're hearing from them, hey, you didn't maybe hit the mark with this piece where you had this proprietary data and you're going went out with it with, something you thought was going to be an obvious hit and then it doesn't land. I think it's important to make sure that then, you're circling back with them and you're sharing the data with them. So you're like, yeah, we all thought this was, a great idea to do a webinar on this topic and share our proprietary insights. But hey,
Yeah.
I guess next time maybe we will do some video shorts, or I guess we needed to do, a blog post or whatever it is, because we don't always know what the right format is for our content or for the right channel for reaching the person that really needs to hear it. We've
Yeah.
talked about this before. Like, I don't like video content unless it's adorable animals. I really, really don't want to sit through a long video. It makes me cranky. I'm a fast reader. I want a nice summary of something. And if it's going to be in video, it needs to be because I need to follow steps and see what's happening. And so it's, making sure that you understand the different kinds of, customers that you have. And for any given topic, how are they going to be using this content? So what is the right format to give it to them in?
Yeah, absolutely. And to your earlier point about the internal process and making sure to incorporate people and understanding how you're making change internally, I think there's also an opportunity to draw those same folks in to the process if we need to have them help us get data that we could use in the videos that you're or the infographics or the reports or whatever we decide to do with the end result. I think there's some opportunities to help create a co-conspirator kind of environment where we can ask them about their, dig into their inherent expertise, right? Because you're saying if we can ask them something instead of like, oh, can you pull numbers on this, right? This is like saying, can you make me a graphic in marketing, right? But if you were to ask them to sort of help you solve a problem, I think that you're going to get way better results when it comes to pulling data out of systems you don't have first party access to. Like, do we track anything that helps explain why this happens would be um, a great way to have a dialogue with somebody who's an expert. Or have you seen any patterns or anomalies? What kind of complaints are you hearing from your customers? Do you have documentations of the tickets that come out of this problem? And um,
And
there's just
timing
so
is
many ways.
everything with these requests too, Maureen.
What's
It's,
that?
timing is everything when it comes to these requests too,
Oh my gosh,
because,
yes.
if every time you come to somebody, it's an emergency and you need the data yesterday, or you need it for a board report, or, oh, it's the end of the quarter, it's the end of the year. Oh gosh, we need all these things, that you're not going to make friends and you're not going to get what you need.
No. No, it's so true. I mean, those people are busy just like we are, right? And your lack of planning does not make it their emergency, period. End of story. It's a really good point. And so, but on the other hand, there's like the flip side of that too, is like if you don't have like a leader champion that can help continually push and prioritize marketing data, even if it's within a reasonable amount of time, it's very easy for those to drop to the bottom of the request pile, right? Because we're not customers. So have you ever run into that? Has that been an issue that you've run into where you've like put in a request for some kind of information from engineering and have it fall into the bottom of the barrel?
Not from engineering, but at Schwab, we had all the analytics went through a special team because they had to have access to the analytics platform.
Sure.
And, there were people who were not me who frequently had a hard time getting the data they wanted in a timely manner, or being able to like really use the data to make their decisions and to push back on things. I, of course, bribed my data analyst and his team with cookies, homemade cookies. And he and I had a weekly meeting, and we did, a combined monthly report together. And then we built like a crazy dashboard that showed a weighted response with the like open rate versus the click-through rate and all that kind of stuff, to give a score to every single email that went out from the team. And then we would present it at the marketing monthly meeting. And so, we were totally co-conspirators, and we had the same narrative, we supported each other, and we figured out, how can we do this? And, I didn't have any money in the budget. We didn't have any money to build that dashboard. We just figured out what it could look like. And we just, were scrappy and pulled it together because we knew that it would help us tell our story better. And, that's just about making it easy for the folks to say yes.
Yes, I love that. And I think that the idea of like plain old school, low stakes bribery is underrated. You know what I'm saying?
I do.
Like,
I do.
I love your cookie concept. We used to bribe our people with, and I say bribe very lightly, everybody. So like, don't get too twisted about it. But like, we used to, if somebody would post something on all three of the channels we were trying to post on, we used to. I wish my team would laugh if they heard me telling the story. We would send tiny little trophies where I would print off an address label and put it all the way around, and we would ship them across the country because that was like at a candy bar, thanks for your great work, and a little card. And literally people just fell over themselves to get these silly little things. They would post it on our internal network. So I just think it's the business of relationships is so ubiquitous. The nature of homemade bribes is underrated. Like we have some opportunities here. Go butter up your data people. I think that's the bottom line here. Go butter up your data people.
Because you're lucky to have them, because in smaller organizations, you don't have data people.
So true. So
if you're
true.
lucky,
And then
you have a poor beleaguered marketing ops person who doesn't want to hear from you.
Honestly, and if you're lucky, I might add. I love that.
What can you do though, if you are in that situation? I mean, at least I feel like now we have AI tools, so you can download an excessive amount of data, and you can have something like a notebook LM go through all that proprietary data and give you some summaries, for example. But in addition to using AI, which seems to me like the low-hanging fruit, what are some other things that you recommend for folks who don't have a data partner?
Yeah, that's a great question. I find that it's still very much like it's difficult to get sales information. It's still difficult to get data from like tools. So a couple of things you could do that might be useful, and I'm actually going to start doing, because I found these tips when I was doing research for our conversation. I was like, what? Have I not done this yet? But the monthly insight snack, which is like a 10 to 15 minute conversation with your data person, where you just dig into the one interesting pattern. Like, what did you see? What in the last week made you go, huh, that was weird? And then have a 10 or 15 minute conversation about that. Go look at that dashboard together. What a great time to ask them to just export that information so you can take a look at it, right? I also think that, if those would be great, and you can go ahead and take those and aggregate them over time. But if you're doing something a little bigger, having like a quarterly content and data alignment meeting where you have more of the heavy hitters of your organization in there to help press on how important it is to provide this information to marketing. In a perfect world, you're already buttering them up, so they're excited to see you anyway, right? But it's great to sort of identify those kinds of themes that are worth exploring as you plan out your quarter. So, and the other tricky part that we're going to run into is like data has a ticker on it, right? Has a timer on it. Yep. It's only valid for a period of time. So I think you have to have both the monthly insight kind of an idea, the snack versus the meal of like a whole sit down conversation, because the whole sit down conversation can be historical. You can say, let's look at what's happened in the past. What are the biggest friction points? What are the biggest opportunities? What are some of the behavioral trends we're seeing? What kind of comments does that make on the industry that we're in? And how would that be valuable to our audience to help build more interest in our product or service? And then you can release these little snacking parts of things that you think might be interesting, but you got to know your customers so well. I don't know if you've ever been in the situation where you've pulled data and you thought, this is so interesting, because you're a marketer. Not because you're whoever you're marketing for, you know what I mean? And then you post it and it gets no response because people just don't care. It's happened to me. I won't even deny it. You know what I mean? So I just feel like this is such a good point to make sure that you are deeply immersed in your market and you definitely understand their mindset or at least empathize with them well enough to be able to make some good judgment calls on this side. Or better yet, use sales engineers if they're available to you and you have a more technical audience, right? Somebody who can go and say, that's stupid, or no, that's super interesting, and here's why.
Before we kind of move on to talking about, what we do with all this data for creating content, I think the one last thing I want to encourage people to do, though, is to annotate their data. And by that, what I mean is when you're doing all these things and you're having these conversations, don't just pull the data and leave it in a file somewhere. Make sure you put notes like that. You're charting things and you're putting in notes. And the reason this comes to mind is I was talking with somebody recently who noted that they were getting flack for their visits to their website being down month over month.
Oh.
But of course, they were down month over month because they'd had a huge breakout, high energy kind of piece of content that had a really significant promotional campaign around it that had made all of their metrics double for 1 month. And then they were being berated the next month that they're doing a bad job because, visits to the website were down. So, you can unfortunately end up in the situation where people have such short memories that they're just looking at that trend line. And if that trend line for the last 30 days is, down and to the right instead of up and to the right, then you end up in these situations where you go from being a hero to a zero. So
it just goes to show that context is key in almost every situation, even data, and I remember in Google Analytics when they originally launched it, you could actually put notes when you saw spikes, be like, I ran this campaign, and then they killed it for a lot of years and I was pissed about it. I was like, that was so helpful, but they brought it back. It's much better. So, but you're right. Context is everything, and you have to make sure that you're also telling your own internal stories, right,
Yep.
about what's happening and why it's happening and why it's going to change. And you have to warn everybody, or else people freak out.
100%. Like if you go and you do a big paid spend of any type that is successful, it is going to wreck your analytics, and people need to understand that. So if you're not able to tag things appropriately so that way you can see the difference between paid and organic, for example, you're going to end up with really, a huge mess from a data standpoint that's going to tell the wrong story.
And I think that that really drives the point home about using your data effectively to ensure that you're making good bets on what you're doing with this data, right? Like you have analytics information. We have an abundance of information. I hope it's set up right so that you can collect information that actually matters to your business. And then you got to use it right. Right? Like, what do you do with that data? I know this is one of your big bugaboos, so I'd love to hear your thoughts on it.
Yeah, it's just
a big sigh. Start with that.
It's just so hard because a lot of times people go into any kind of data situation thinking that they already know the answer. They have something that they're trying to prove with the data versus being open to what the data might be showing them. And I think that's especially true if people's budgets and internal silos and all of these things are really wound up in things being a certain way.
Yeah.
So that for me is where that sigh came from. Because too often I find that people aren't necessarily, they're not always open to hearing the story that the data is trying to tell them.
Absolutely. It's much easier to just go with your gut.
Right?
But
that's also then how you end up not having time to ever get to those projects you want to do.
Well, and I think it's to your point earlier about the different types, like the different types of content formats and the different length of the format and what, who's watching what and who's watching what, why. Sorry, I'm on a big street. It's kind of loud sometimes, but yeah. So I just think that there's this opportunity for us to be, like you had mentioned this earlier, was just making sure that you understand who your people are, what the data says about those people,
Yep.
and ultimately using those analytics and that good governance that you've put in place, and going there and saying, being open and saying, how will this perform for me? How will this work?
And tailoring it, now we don't have an excuse anymore because
No.
the tools that we're using are so much more capable and able to take in a really good template, for example, of, hey, you're doing an email to your database. Well, you can have so much variable content that AI can help
Yes.
you tailor if you've been, actively segmenting people or based upon their actions and things they've read, whatever you know about them. We no longer can say, oh, it's too hard or we don't have the information. Now we actually have the ability to get closer to having that one-on-one conversation with the people that are part of our community, that are part of our customer base, versus just serving up the same old content to everybody. So that to me is what's really exciting about where the data can take you, because it's not just that it has a story to tell, it has different stories that it can help you tell to the different people. And that is where I think you're going to be able to build those trusted or long-term relationships. Because when you feel like somebody really knows you and that they're reaching you where you are versus, how annoying is it to get something that's tailored to a brand new marketer when you've been a marketer for a very long time? If I get an email like that from somebody, I hit unsubscribe. I am like, wow, okay, this is not for me. And I'm mad that I gave them my email address. That is how I feel.
Or way worse, you see that I work at a technology company and you send me an email about wanting to invest in my company and not looking at my profile at all, right? Just like wildly off. I got that the other day. I was like, what is happening? I'm not. Ooh.
That is partially why I changed my LinkedIn profile, because I had before had founder in my profile, and I took founder off every place that it had been previously and changed it to something else, because the kinds of ridiculous bad emails that I was receiving, because people thought I was a startup founder, like a technology startup founder. I was like, oh geez, I don't need another one of these emails, please, ever.
100%. It's so funny that we're talking about data generated content and then using the data the marketing data and to inform the kinds of content we create from the data. It's all very meta, getting very layered. Right?
Well, then let's just take a step back. Let's talk about when you're just starting to think about this, like what are some of the ways that you can start putting that data into play with your content strategy and creation?
Well, I think you can really show a lot of value by talking about how the data is aligned with real world problems, right? Real user problems. People are actually out there struggling. How can you use that data to help them either get insights or sympathize with them or show that you understand their problems well enough to be able to help them solve them?
Yep.
I think the customer friction is probably one of the number one things, right? Because you can sit there and you can say 8 out of 10 people eat cheese. And you're like, so who cares? Right. So now you have to set context, back to context. I love context. It's my favorite. Back to context. So you have to help them draw the line between where they are, where the data is and where they are. And you need to make that super obvious. I've actually lost track of the question already. What was the question? I want to make sure I'm answering it.
Just talking about take a step back, because we did get a little weedy because we get heckin' excited about all the things that we can do with our data. But I wanted to just talk, since we have about 15 minutes left before we're done with lunch for the day and content chat for the day, about how you can use data in your content. So some of the kind of more practical tangible ways to start involving data in your storytelling.
Yeah, I do think establishing that everybody understands there's a problem using stats is a great way to sort of create empathy and align expectations across the board.
Yep.
And then, so like that can talk about industry, that can talk about business challenges, that can talk about a variety of different things. So that way we can just collectively accept that, thank you for this data. You have now explained to me there's a problem, and you might have even substantiated it with a third-party piece of research, like an analyst report that says, we're not the only ones saying this. This seems to be across the board. What a great opportunity for you to set a stage. I think that's a big bucket, right? And I think the next bucket is really about explaining or helping people understand how we have helped other people using these kinds of statistics and this data. And I mean, we all know that case studies with data is tricky. It's a hard thing to get, but if you can get it, what an incredibly powerful tool to show the benchmarking, to understand the rate of improvement, to show volume, to show a variety of different things, to help people understand, to help people see themselves in the data in a meaningful way.
And honestly, this is where the anonymous case study is so helpful, because you can have customers who love you, but know they will never get the approval to share some of that data publicly. But when you tell them that's okay, we don't need your logo. We're not trying to convince people based on your logo. We're trying to show people your results. Then they frequently will feel empowered to give you that kind of data. And if you have a really good data story of the impact you've made, then it doesn't matter that you don't have that logo on there, because you have real results.
This is a very, very dicey one for me in my current role, because when you have a super skeptical audience, like without that logo, it can be very tricky to convince them it's real and you're not just making things up. So if you do have that situation and you do need to make anonymized case studies, I highly recommend making them as detailed as possible.
Yep, 100%.
So the
and
more
you
information,
have the like industry of the person, have their role, have direct quotes. Because again, you're not putting their name on it, but when you have their real words, it will resonate with the people like them who are in those same roles, in those same industries, because they can tell that it's real, because they can feel the pain.
And they see themselves in it. And I had a lady who could go so far as to actually give me her name, but couldn't give me her title, or her name and title, but not her company. So she could literally put her name and her title on it, but just couldn't have like the org itself.
Yeah.
So anybody who looked her up would be like, oh, she's legit, you know?
Yeah, they don't know which one of her experiences she was talking about per se, but there's so many things that you can do when you have that data that people are willing to share.
Yep. And I think lower in the funnel, or not even lower in the funnel, like using those kinds of data points to help sort of inspire the customer challenges, or understanding, how many people are asking questions about this part of the sales cycle, or this part of the sales cycles are so long now. There's so many questions that are being answered across the board. If you understand what percentage of people are asking the same kinds of questions, you can really tailor your energy as a small but mighty marketing group to make sure that you're doing the things with the biggest impact, right? Yeah. That's a big one.
And, one of the things that I'm really a fan of doing that people don't think about this being a content element, is I also like thinking through what are those things we can do in person where we're bringing our customers together with our prospects, with our internal SMEs, but you, the content person, have orchestrated that conversation and getting the right people in the room. So that way, and then you're there. So that way you get to overhear all of it and create that derivative content. I've only worked a couple places where I've been able to do that. But when you're able to, go to an industry event and have a special dinner with some of your executives at a really fancy place with, some of your best customers and some ideal prospects, the conversations are so amazing. And you've prepped everybody. So that way, everyone's ready and it's sparkling conversations and it's a great, presentation or somebody sharing their story. Because that's what I always do is I always say, hey, we're going to have, this specific customer sharing their story. They're going to present. And so they give like a casual conversation about their challenge and how they solved this problem. And then everyone sits and eats dinner. Those are amazing. They take a lot of planning. It is not inexpensive, but the value from that, oh my goodness. And people frequently just think, oh, that's the events people or the sales people do that. And no way. If your content person is not part of that planning and part of the orchestration, you are missing out on so much.
I agree with you. I think that's a phenomenal insight. We just got back from a show in October, and honestly, like just listening to those conversations and being able to glean what you could just from the booth visits, I can't imagine being able to sit down and listen to an in-depth conversation. That's not something I've ever had a chance to do. I bet it's really cool.
It is. And, similarly, content doesn't get invited to things like customer advisory board meetings, but you're having those meetings. And yes, they are not on the record in that they're not being recorded and shared publicly, but you need your content person there because they're going to get amazing ideas and just hearing the real life things that that your best customers are thinking about. And it's going to completely change then what kind of data they're going to go after in order to either solve some of the problems they heard or to substantiate some of the things they heard. So again, it's about providing that context to your content and marketing teams so that way they look at the data differently and even just know what data to look for that they wouldn't even know about.
Yeah, that's a great point. I think a good a way to wrap this up, because I know sometimes we like to take questions at the end. Do we still do that?
I don't think we really have time for questions, but Anne will, we know we have Anne hanging out with us today and Wynn. But I think probably we need to wrap up, but this has just been fun because this is such a great topic.
It is a good topic. And I think what this boils down to is data. You have a gold mine of data somewhere, someplace about what your customers are doing, whether it's just on your website, you can go learn about them there. Whether it's on your software, you can go learn about them there. Whether you reach out into your marketing pool and you get data there, or you pay for that. I mean, there's a variety of different ways you can get data that is uniquely yours, and AI cannot replicate. They can reference, but they cannot replicate it. And this is where we all need to be, is always challenging this concept of what can we do that AI cannot do. And then we talked about this a couple weeks ago too. So data can tell us what's happening from those variety of different sources. AI can help us process or summarize that material or pull out big themes from big banks of numbers that we just as marketers are A, not interested in doing, and B, who has the time. And then we have this ability to take all of that processing and turn it into some creative campaign that draws the attention of the audience that you know well. I think that's kind of the big upshot here.
Exactly, because AI still can't build those communities and those relationships for you. Only you, the human being, can do that.
They also cannot bribe your data people with cookies.
They can't make cookies yet.
Nope, it's not a thing.
I love it. Well, Maureen, thank you so much for this delightful conversation. And we'll be back next week to be talking about brand voice, which is always one of my favorite topics. So thanks,
everybody. It's us again, too. Come back. Come hang out with us.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.